So you've opened up your scan drawing in Photoshop, and the first thing that we want to do is what? Where should we start?
Get rid of the line and the dots.
Get rid of the line and the dots? Okay, so how are we going to do that? We need to start selecting parts of the drawing. So we don't want to delete everything. We don't want to go in pixel by pixel and change its color from black to white. So what we can do is, there we go, is zoom in, right? So you can either use your shortcuts from Illustrator, which are Command or Control plus and minus to zoom in. You can use the little magnifying glass over here and drag it around. You might have a default set for scrubby zoom, which I find really annoying. So if that's on when you have your magnifying glass selected, it's going to zoom in or zoom out, dynamically. I find it easier to control if you turn that off and then drag a window around what you want to zoom to. So if we get in here up close and personal, we can see that there's a lot of stuff that's it was either dirt on the scanner bed or some small things that were left on the drawing. So one way that we can select that information to get rid of it is by choosing one of the lasso tools. So over here on the left, there's marquee tools, which are on the top, which means if I draw a box, I can draw a box around something. And there's lasso tools, which mean I can control what the box looks like. It doesn't have to just be rectangular, circular, or elliptical. So if I hold this down, I can get rectangular, elliptical, or I can choose rows. So I probably want to be able to control what shape I'm drawing these things in, so I'm going to go into the polygonal lasso tool. And that just means that when I draw it, it's going to have straight edges, as opposed to if I were to use the basic lasso tool, it lets me kind of draw more organic shapes. So the polygonal lasso tool, you basically click to set points, and you can outline your area that you want to adjust or affect. You can hold down Shift, and you can see that there's a little plus sign that pops up, or you can hold down Option or Alt on a PC to subtract. So I'm going to hold down Shift and add this portion over here. Right. And I'm going to grab these guys and all of this stuff. I can zoom out, I can pan around, make sure that I've got all of the stuff that I want to make sure I get rid of. Everybody doing okay so far? You're grabbing your stuff, grabbing your things you want to get rid of. I can grab a whole bottom side of the page if I want to make sure I'm getting rid of this line. I can select beyond the edge of the page to make sure that I get the whole way across. A lot of times, especially with something that's scanned, it's good to grab all of the borders if they're not something that are part of your image, right? So I can grab all of this outside stuff, because you'll get kind of shadows from the edges of the page or where the scanner has gone across. I could also, because this is a black and white, or because it's a line drawing, I could also just go all the way around here. I've basically got white as a background color, so I could go around and grab all of this stuff outside of the image. Right, I could grab, I'm not doing it very cleanly, but I could grab all of this stuff, even the stuff that already looks white, and just add it to my selection. Okay, so when you're done with that, there's a couple of different things that you can do. So you can either use the eraser tool, which honestly I never use. You can use some of the healing brush or the spot healing brush tools, which will allow for you for the computer to go in, and if I zoom in here kind of closely, if you just hold down Alt or Option to select an area and then run your mouse over it, it'll basically cover it up like a Band-Aid.
There's an eraser tool, a magic eraser tool.
Well, let's go through them one by one. So right now we're in the healing brush tool, which is something that takes, and this one works better when you have like a field of information. It doesn't really matter when you're dealing with white on white, or getting rid of white, but it samples a field that you tell it to. So you hold down Option, so it turns into this little target, right? And it's going to pick a point to sample from, and then I can use that point to bandage over other parts of my drawing, right? And I can do that with these areas selected or not, but having them selected makes me accidentally not erase over one of my lines that I want to keep. All right, so I can go in and healing brush all of these areas. Does that make sense?
Does that work like the stamp tool, or?
It works kind of like the stamp tool, except it's more dynamic. It will rather than, so the stamp tool will like take the specific outline of something and specifically outline it on top of it. The healing brush tool goes in and tries to kind of feather that into the background. So it'll try to go in and repair patterns and different things like that.
You select the healing brush tool.
Yep, and then you hold down Alt to choose an area to sample from. So I want to pick a white area, and then I can scroll over, and with Alt not selected anymore, I can go over and I can repair the areas that are, that have stuff in them that I want to get rid of. Is that working for you guys? Are you able to get that to work? Do you understand what's happening?
So Alt to select the area that's a similar color that you want to.
Right, and then let go of Alt, and then you're basically painting over the parts that you want to get rid of with the brush.
So when I'm painting, what button am I hitting?
No buttons, just your mouse.
Okay.
You'll see too, the area that you're painting might be very small. The size of the brush you can control up here. So if you click on this little icon that says a number below it, you can change the size of your brush. So now I'm painting a really big area. You can also use the bracket keys to step up and step down your brush size without having to go do that. So you can, I'm just pressing the open and close brackets to step it up and step it down, which is convenient. So the healing brush tool may or may not be the best choice. You can also do the spot healing brush tool, which does not require you to choose a sample area. So I could just go in here and take the spot healing brush tool, draw over where I want it to repair, and it will automatically fix it for me. So Photoshop's gotten pretty smart.
Yeah, that's the new one.
Yeah. The clone stamp tool is from back in the olden days, before it got that smart. And I'm gonna deselect this so that I can use part of this area. I don't want to actually do this, but just to demonstrate what the tool does. So the clone brush tool works in a similar way. I need to define an area that I want to sample from. So I'm holding down Alt or Control to sample from an area. And then, for instance, say for instance I wanted to get rid of this entire area of drawing. I just take the white and I paint over what it has been drawn here. I can also choose a selected area first and use the clone tool so that I'm only painting in that area. It'll go up to the edge of the selection but not beyond. Right, so I'm able to control what information is in the image using these different tools. I can also just take the rectangular marquee tool if I want to get rid of this bottom edge that you can still see a little bit down here. I can just grab that whole thing and hit delete, and it'll ask me, so it's going to delete all of that information. It'll ask me what I want to fill it with, so I can tell it I want to fill it with white, and that'll get rid of the whole thing. That only works when you have a white background that you're trying to get rid of. Yep.
It will delete the color of the background on the panel for the two squares. The one is the behind them.
It will ask you, in the newer version, it will ask you what you want to delete. So I can either delete to white, I can delete to the foreground color, the background color, or black or 50% gray.
Can you delete it to a way to match the background?
That's what I just did. So, what's that?
It will be different white color though.
Well, we're going to fix that in a minute. So we want it to be white. So if our image isn't exactly white, we'll fix that in a minute. Another thing that affects that is whether your image or whether your layer is a background layer or an actual layer. So layers, like in Rhino, are really important in Photoshop. They allow for you to organize information. They also will be they'll have different levels of visibility on top of each other. So if I wanted to add, a new layer and draw something on top of it, and fill it with, I don't know, yellow. I can do that. So this is on a layer that's on top of my background layer. I can adjust the opacity of it so it's not affecting any of the information below it. I can move it around, and it's not affecting my image below. I can control the visibility of those, right? I can turn this on and off. So basically it's really important in Photoshop to be organizing things in layers and to name them, right? You can double click on the layer, so I'm going to call this, yellow, whatever, outline. When you open up an image that you didn't make in Photoshop, it will automatically convert the image to a background layer, and you can see over here on the right side that it's locked. A good thing to get in the practice of doing is just double clicking on the layer and hitting OK, and it will turn it into a layer that you can adjust rather than just a background layer. This means that you could, if you wanted to, turn this information into a transparent layer. When you see these black or these gray and white boxes behind it, it means that what's in front of it is clear, is transparent. You can see through it. So I could take this into another file, or I could put something behind it, and this part of the drawing is basically cut out. Is this making sense to you guys? So we have an image, we're adjusting the content of that image. That image can be one of many layers on top of each other that comes together to make an overall graphic. Are you having any questions? I'm not hearing any questions. No? Okay. So is everybody comfortable with taking out stuff from your drawing or cleaning up scratches or extra stuff? Schmutz? Yes? Anybody still having issues or questions? No? Okay. So what we want to do now is make sure that our blacks are black and our whites are white. So under Image, Adjustments, you want to make sure that you don't have anything selected because you want to be dealing with the whole image, not just a portion of it. So Control D will deselect everything if you have something selected, or you can just hit Escape and it should deselect everything. So Image, Adjustments, there's a whole ton of adjustments in here that you can make. What we typically want to be dealing with in the beginning are these four up here, right? So levels, curves, exposure, and brightness and contrast, especially with a black and white image. If you're dealing with color, then you start to get into vibrance and hue and saturation. But for now, we're going to be dealing with these guys up here. So levels, if I click on that, tells me or gives me a graph of the level or the amount of white and the amount of black in the drawing. And it lets me adjust the range of that. So if I start to bring this in, it's going to set the new white to something closer to the black on this spectrum, if that makes sense. I can adjust where the middle is, so I can make my middle grays more white or more black or more black or more white. And I can adjust the black side to make my blacks darker and darker and darker, right? So you can go in and adjust the sliders for this, or you can go over here on the right side and choose one of these little eyedroppers. The one on the right is white, the one in the middle is gray, and the one on the left is black. And you can, so if I were to click this white one, it's basically now letting me tell it what should be white. So if I click somewhere in this area where it should be white, it's not going to look like it did much because my background was already pretty much white, but it's going to make that adjustment, and so now it's going to set that area or that tone as the white, the new white in the drawing.
So it's that area.
One at a time. What's that?
Does it automatically, recognize the lines? So like if you set the background to white, will it catch anything that you might have missed in the cleanup?
No, it's not going to deal with dust and scratches and any of that stuff. It's just going to make the white as possible. Because the white might be, just a little bit gray or just a little bit yellow. What's that?
It will make it to a standard color.
Right. Jeremy, what was your question?
I don't know my question.
Okay.
Sorry.
So in levels, that's one way that you can start to make an adjustment, right? So I can, depending on what my intention is, I want to at least be able to see the outlines. I want them to be seen very clearly. The amount of gray of the shading is up to you. And then I hit OK to set that. You can also make adjustments in the curves area. So this is going to be a little hard to see. But in here, you can do similar things where you can adjust this profile curve and adjust the blacks and the whites and the settings in here. You can kind of make these things in different curves, and it will adjust the visibility of, or the kind of graphic quality of the image. Somebody once told me that the proper curve is slightly S-shaped. So it was somebody that seems to, that was a graphic designer for a long time and seems to know what they're doing, so I trust his opinion.
Do you usually do curves, or do you usually just adjust it the other way?
I usually start with levels, and if there's some small refinement that I can't quite get to work, then I switch into curves.
Isn't the curve more like adjusting the color?
What's that?
Isn't the curve adjusting more the color of your
Adjusting the color?
color?
What do you mean?
Just the colors of your picture.
Well, it's adjusting the tones, so it's adjusting the grays as well. Speaking of which, modes are important to understand. So under image, mode, the one above, adjustments. We haven't really talked about color spaces yet, but you guys have probably heard by now of RGB or CMYK. Those are the two main types of color spaces. So RGB, red, green, and blue, are the three colors that are used in projections, in video screens, and TV screens, and those sorts of things. So everything that we see on the screen is made up of a combination of red, green, and blue together to make colors. Projected or light colors, colorways are subtractive. So when you add two colors together, they get lighter and lighter. So white is the combination of red, green, and blue, where black is the absence of any of those. The opposite of that is CMYK, which is used for printing. So printers, plotters will use some combination of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, black being the K. And it's additive, right? So if I take, it's like if I take pigment and add it together, if I add cyan and magenta together, I'm going to get a darker color. If I add, blue and yellow together, I'm going to get green. So black in CMYK is the combination of all four of those things, and white is the absence of those. So you want to have your image working in the colors, the mode that you're going to be, that its final form is going to be. So if at the end of the day, I'm working on this image to print it, I want to be working in CMYK. If at the end of the day, I'm going to merge, okay. If at the end of the day I'm going to be projecting it on the screen, I'm going to be working in it in RGB. So I want to change this to CMYK. Right. Okay, so I've generally cleaned up my drawing. I've gotten my whites white and my blacks black. I can go in and do any fine-tuning that I need to clean things up. And that's going to be pretty much as we need to know for now. Let's see. All right, so you know how to select. You know how to add to a selection by holding down Shift. You can subtract from a selection by holding down Alt. There's different selection tools, right? There's polygonal lassos, polygonal tools and polygonal lasso tools. There's the marquee tools, which are, boxes. You know how to use some of the healing brush tools and the spot healing brush tools, as well as the stamp tool. You can go in and use the eraser too. I don't know if it's just my personal mode, but I never use the eraser. I prefer to use the healing brush or the spot tools.
Because the eraser doesn't take a sample of the nearby color? Is that why you don't like using the eraser?
Yeah, the eraser erases, it will remove whatever it is and replace it with whatever is the background color.
Okay.
So it's going to erase everything that I'm drawing over top of and make it, actually it's making it transparent. Oh, because I made it a layer, yeah. So I just don't like to work that way. It doesn't mean that you can't work that way. Other people might prefer it. The other tool that I didn't mention is the magic wand tool, which is this one. So if you have this magic wand selected, you can click and it will select everything that's similar to that you clicked on up to a certain point. So you can control that with the tolerance. So if you want it to select everything that's a little bit white, you can set it to a low tolerance, and it will, hopefully it's picking up white everywhere. It will select things that are only very similar. If you set it to a higher tolerance, it'll be a little bit more inclusive. So now I've accidentally picked up this bottom line because it's close enough to white within that tolerance range. There's something over here called contiguous, which means is it next to each other? And so if I turn this off and I use the magic wand tool again, it's going to select everything that's white in the drawing, not just things that are up to a line that changes the color, right? So if I turn contiguous on and select that, sorry, I'm going to turn this tolerance back down. If I use the magic wand tool with contiguous on, it's going to select everything that's white up to a point where it reaches something that's not white. So if I wanted to select inside this area, I could do that with contiguous on. If I turn it off, it's going to select everything that's white everywhere. So it's just good to know how to use both of those. Okay, so we're pretty close to being done with this, or being at least to the point where we can export this and put it on our presentation board. The last thing we want to do is save it or scale it down to the point where we don't have way more information than we need to bring into Illustrator. So under image size, image size, we can go in here and see how big this thing is, right? So we scanned this thing, it's 8.5 by 11 roughly at 300 pixels per inch, and it's a pretty big file. 34 megabytes for one image like this is fairly big. It's also bigger than we're going to need it on our presentation board. So one thing I could do is go in here and under document size, I can change this to 6, and if this is linked, it will automatically proportionally adjust the height. So from 8.5, I can go to 6, and it will update the height. I can change the resolution to 150 if I wanted to, and you can see up here what size the image was and what size it is now. You can constrain the proportions or turn that off so that you can change things to be bigger or smaller separately from each other, not connected in terms of width and height. And so all of these things are things that you should do in Photoshop before you bring a file into Illustrator. You may not always have the time, or you may not always know exactly what size you want something to be, and 6 may not be exactly the dimension that we need, but at least we're getting it in the right ballpark. You know, if you scanned it in and it was 36 inches wide, and you brought it into Illustrator and you only needed it to be 2 inches wide, you have a ton of information that Illustrator has to store to show that image at 2 inches. Yep.
On the resizing at the very bottom,
Uh-huh.
see it says 5 feet automatic.
Yep.
You can click on the menu, if you're making something smaller, it's better to use a sharp menu. This is really true for images more than line work.
If you're making it smaller.
Make it
Yeah.
small. I had half my book got rejected because I used this method without doing it.
Without being the sharper. And you can also turn resampling off if you don't want it to make any of those adjustments. So once you're done with that, you can save this. You can either save it over top of the original file, or you can save it as a new version of it. So, you know, we know exactly where these drawings are going, so you can probably save over top of it. But if it's something like a model photograph that you might use in a presentation board, and then in your portfolio, and then in somewhere else, you might want to keep the original without having made any modifications to it, and then save a copy of it. So I can save it as scan to Axon. I'm going to save it as a JPEG just for file size issues. So I'm going to save this as scanned Axon 1, you know, for board, something like that. So you can control the file format down here. Hit save. It's going to ask me what quality I want. I can either give it a higher or lower quality. Always do the maximum, in my opinion. And I don't usually make any of the other adjustments. So I'm going to hit OK. And now I have that file now that I can bring into Illustrator. Does that generally make sense? Yes? No? Questions, comments, concerns?
You're going to be posting this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's do the same thing now with our photograph. So if you don't have a photograph, you should all have photographs of your models. So I'm going to grab one of my photographs. I'm going to get one with some volumes in it just so that I have something to work with. Okay. So I've done a pretty good job of photographing this so that there's not a lot of, stuff I need to remove. My background isn't quite white, and I know from Dan that I want my my background to be just completely white and knocked out. I don't want it to seem like it has any shadows. Did he say anything about shadows, or did he want just the base of the drawing?
I think he wants the shadow.
He wants the shadows? Okay. So we're just going to get rid of all of this. You can't really see it on the projector very clearly, but this is kind of grayish, right? It's not white. So when we put it on our presentation board, which is going to be a white piece of paper, we don't want to have kind of a slightly off-white square that defines our image. We want at the edge of the cardboard and at the edge of the shadow, we want it to stop there and turn into totally white. Okay, so there's a couple ways we can do this. Because our model and our shadows are straight lines, probably the easiest thing to do is to go in with the polygonal lasso tool and click along the edges, right? So I'm going to basically draw an outline around my model and my shadow. Right, and you can get in and really fine-tune this. I'm going to go in with my zoom tool, and I didn't quite follow the line here, so I'm going to make an adjustment by holding down Alt and subtracting out this part that's not quite part of my image. And I didn't quite follow the line up here, so I'm going to go in and fine-tune this.
How do you undo? You said Alt?
How do you subtract?
Yeah.
Alt. And so I'm going to get this really close along the edges. Right? And you can spend more time doing that later. You want to make sure anti-aliasing is on. So pixels are squares, right? So if we zoom in as small as possible, this whole image, even if it's made up of curving lines or diagonals, is a series of square dots that are given a value of color. So if I have a diagonal line, it's actually a series of squares that are filled in. Right, so that's making up my line. In previous versions, before graphics got really sophisticated, you would see that stepping when you drew diagonal lines, and you can still see it if you have a really low resolution image that has a lot of that sort of things in it. Anti-aliasing is something that tries to help you deal with that, right? So if I zoom in here, I can see the pixels. If I turn, I lost my anti-aliasing. Where did it go? Here we go. If I turn this off and zoom in, it basically just refines it. So it's going to go in and try to make the selection so that it creates as smooth a diagonal or a curved line as possible. I can also go in once it's selected and click on Refined Edges. And I can go in, you'll see the preview of it over here in the actual screen. And it will allow for me to make some adjustments to the selection. And you can see the update of what's happening as a result over here. So feathering kind of makes it a little bit fuzzier around the edge. Smoothing will do something similar. Contrast, if I up that, will try to try to increase the difference between something and the other and make it a little bit more clear. You can turn on Smart Radius and give it a higher pixel number, and it will try to go in and intelligently do some of these things for you. I find Refined Edges to be a good thing to use most of the time to go in and really fine-tune what's happening along the edge. Yep.
I found it.
Oh, you got it? Okay. So when you're done, just hit OK, and you'll go back to your original image with the edge now refined. So basically we want to delete out everything that isn't selected. So if I hit delete now, it's going to delete out the part of my model, which I don't want to do. So I'm going to undo that. And I basically want to invert the selection, or I don't basically, I want to invert the selection. So the shortcut for doing that is Control-Shift-I, and it will flip it around so that now when I hit delete, it's deleting the background. Or under under select, you can go down here to inverse. So Control-Shift-I, Command-Shift-I, or select and inverse. And then once you have it inverted, just click delete, and you want the content of the things that it's removing to revert to white. And this is, this is true white, so you can hit OK. You could also fill, you could edit and fill that area with white if you didn't want to delete it, or if you wanted to, I don't know, fill it with not exactly white. Anyway, there's a couple different ways you could do it, but for your intents and purposes, I think that's good enough. Yep. Question or comment?
Well, it's a comment.
Yes.
Generally, if my policy is to not destroy anything,
Uh-huh.
and so
You would mask it.
use a mask
Yeah.
instead. Yeah. And same thing with like curve adjustments or level adjustments.
You would use them as an adjustment layer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's non-destructive editing, which is a really good practice to get into. So I'll show you quickly how to do a mask. So I'm going to go under History, which is one of my window panels. If it's not on, you can go here, Window and History. You can only undo one step at a time in Photoshop, so you have to go into History if you want to undo more than one thing. So if I go back to my opening, I'm going to go to the point where I've refined my edge. Under Channels, it's another palette. If you don't have it, under Window, Channels, turn it on over here. You can click New, and it will give you an alpha layer. Alpha is something that controls visibilities. And Joseph, if I'm saying any of this wrong, please correct me. The way that I've always done it is if you go in to if you go in and turn back all of your layers on with alpha on top of it, you can fill this interior area with white, and what's red is what's being masked off. Do you guys understand the concept of a mask? Like if I were to take, it's like putting something over top of something else and letting parts of it through, right? So if I were to put a mask over my face, there would be cutouts where the eye and the mouth was, or something like that, right? And so the mask is covering up most everything, but it's letting other parts through. So if I have an image that's this whole thing, but I only want to look at part of it and I want to get rid of everything else, I can draw a mask over top of it that will take this portion of it and hide it, right? So that I'm just looking at this interior part. And we'll get into this more in Illustrator too eventually, where you can mask things that are shaded. So it's taking, this red part is now a mask that instead of deleting the almost white border exterior portion, it's hiding it from view, right? So if I were to then go in to oh no, I'm going to forget how to do this.
You can also do that with the layers as well.
What's that?
You can also make masks by layer.
Right. Yeah, you can do a layer mask too. So maybe I did this the wrong way. Maybe I should have done it with a layer. So new layer. Sorry, it's been a while since I've done this. Not smart objects. Sorry. Then I can what?
So that's just select the select menu.
Cool.
little mask up, which is right next to the black and white and between FX and black and white on the bottom.
Hey, learn something new every day. Awesome. Okay, so we made the alpha channel. We turn this into a layer, not a background. Select load selection. And we tell it that we want the selection to be from that alpha channel, right? So that's the same thing that we did over here. Hit OK, and then turn that into a mask.
Can you go again? Sorry.
Yeah, I should have Joseph come up and do it. Okay, so we've made an alpha layer, right? We made this layer that took all of the stuff that was in our model. You go into your layers that has your photograph in it. Double click on it if you haven't already to turn it into layer 0 and not background. Under select, load selection. And you want it to load the information that's on the alpha 1 channel. Right? So that's what we just made over here. Hit OK. And then to turn that into a mask, you click on add layer mask. And you can see the part that used to be white is now gray and white squares. And so that means it's transparent. Cool? All right. So the last thing that you might want to do to this is adjust your levels and your curves. We now have color that we're dealing with, so you might want to adjust the hue and saturation, which means you can go in and start to make it, if the color is slightly off, you can go in and start to adjust it. You can make it less saturated, more gray and white. You can make it more white and black. Yep.
Do you have any recommendations for consistency among all of the photos?
Yes, I do. We will do that in just a second. Yes, I would suggest setting up an action, and then you can just play it over and over again. I'll show you how to do that in a second. So just to finish up on that though, so image adjustments, hue, saturation, color balance, you can go in and start adjusting, more red versus cyan in the highlights or the low tones. And just get it to look the way that it should look. It looks really green up on the screen up here. It looks much more red on my screen. When you print it, it's going to look something different entirely. So it's a kind of a process of trying to figure out what the best way to do that is. So we are essentially done. But to address Angela's question, if I were to open up the next version of this, right, I really don't want to have to go through that whole process again. So if I'm smart, when I start doing this, I'm going to make an action. So under Window, make sure your Actions panel is open. I'm going to add it up here. So actions are basically like little macros that are held within the program. So it has some default ones that are pretty scary. It has one called wood frame that if I select wood frame and press play, it's going to go through. Image must be open. Okay, whatever. It's going to go through and it's automatically doing a bunch of stuff that's going to put this lovely wooden frame around my picture, right? Really nice, huh? And you can go through under the history and see what all of the different, the history and the layers and see what all it did. I really don't want that to happen. So, but I can make my own action, right? So if I would recommend doing this both in your scan drawings and in this document. To make a new action, you click here on this little page with its corner turned up, which is the universal symbol for new. Create new action. So I'm going to call this delete model photo backgrounds. And I'm going to click record. And so now my little record light is on here, and it's going to record everything that I do until I tell it to stop under this delete model photo background. So I might go in, and it depends on what's going to be the same between each image. So if you're going to do any color adjustment, I would do it here. So image adjustments, hue saturation, maybe I want this to be a little bit less red. So I'm going to go in here under my channels, levels, I forget which of these are, under reds and make it slightly less saturated. I'm going to go into yellows and make it a little bit lighter. You know, whatever the case may be to get this looking the right color to me. And then I'm going to hit OK. And you can see now under my action, it's got a sub step underneath it. So it recorded what I did in terms of hue and saturation. You can most likely do things like use the magic wand tool to select the kind of perimeter and adjust your tolerance. Because your images were all taken in the same lighting with the same background of relatively the same object, if you can get it to work correctly in one, it will likely work in all of them, as long as you don't accidentally, you know, click in an area where in some images there's something and in some images there's nothing, right? So I can click to add all of this to my selection using the magic wand tool. I can add, let's see, what would be the right way to do this from the beginning, Joseph?
In layers palette.
In layers, add a new mask layer.
First you want to invert that selection.
Right. And then I want to turn this into a layer. So I've inverted my selection, so I just have my model selected, and then I want to take that selection and make it a mask, right? Which is this little icon down here on the bottom. So now I've got a transparent background for everything else. Is that right? Okay. And so then that's probably all I need to do under this action, so I can hit stop. And when I open up my next image, right, which is this one, I can go up here to wherever my beginning of my action is. I can click on the top name and press play. And it's going to do everything for me. Actions are good. Actions are good too when we get into like rendering and dealing with kind of environmental graphics, those sorts of things. You can, you know, if you come across a process for making something like a really moody fog or making a vignette or something, you can save that action as a general action, not one specific to a series of photographs, and then use it over and over again without having to repeat all of those steps. So, set up actions. The same thing for your other drawings. Okay, so I'm going to save this, and let's see. I probably need to save it as a PNG if I want the transparent background. I can also save it just as a JPEG or a TIFF, and it's going to convert that transparent portion into white, which is fine for my intents and purposes. So I'm going to call this model TIFF stew. So I could save it as a TIFF. It doesn't really matter to me that it's transparent. I just want it to be white. So I'm saving this in a correct file name, which I had not converted before because I was lax in my file name management. Hitting save. Compression again, you can compress it to one of these things. I'm going to leave it on none, leave all of that. What's that?
Save transparency.
Oh, down here, save transparency. So again, transparency isn't really critical to me, but if you want to save it, you can do that. So I'm going to keep it on the layers. That's all fine and dandy. And then I'm going to go into Illustrator and open up my template that I downloaded from the Canvas site.
So does it have to be a TIFF if you want transparency?
Yeah.
It can be a TIFF or a PNG. You can save it as a Photoshop file. What are some of the other options? TIFF, PNG, Photoshop. Yeah.
Photoshop is generally the best, just because.
Especially because you're interfacing with Illustrator, so it's all the same. Yeah. So sorry, my Illustrator's opening slowly. I'm going to open. I'm going to open my layout template. If it gives you that error message, just say open anyway. It's telling me that I don't have the same fonts that Dan does. Actually, I'm going to open. open this one. It should be, is the one that you have called board template or layout? Layout, okay. So yours probably looks a little bit different than mine. So this is what it should look like, and this is what Dan has given us in terms of the things that, the way it should go, right? So he's got a title up here at the top. He's got the project name. He's got 3+ Summer Studio. He has a basic label down here that says Axonometrics. He has one over here that says plans and sections. One down here at the bottom that says photos, even though these are placeholders for the photos and not the actual photos. And one over here that says sketches. So what we need to do is replace this template information with our actual files. So yours doesn't have any of these guidelines in it. Who remembers how to get guides? Drag them from the ruler. Who remembers how to turn on your rulers if they're not on? Control R, very good. So I can grab a guide and pull it out. I've gone ahead and done that already in this one. So I basically put a guide at the bottom of the images and at the center of them because I know that that's going to be a consistent point in all of my drawings. And then over here on the right side where I have these plans, I outlined both of the sides and the bottom, so I had some way of registering. Right? I've drawn guides down at the bottom around some of the lines and the toolbars and those sorts of things just because I wanted them to be accurate. They were a little bit off. And your guides, you can lock them once you're done, otherwise you might accidentally move them around. Until you do that, you can grab a guide and move it around, right? We remember this from the other day. So under View, Guides, I'm going to lock my guides. And there's shortcuts for that you might want to start using. So Control, Shift, and colon, semicolon, colon.
To ask a question that's not, can you open that window back up?
To ask a question.
What is that symbol that looks like the shadow of a Y backwards? What does that mean?
This one?
No, that's control.
The one on the left?
What is it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not a Mac person, that's why I'm...
Yeah, Command Alt and then, is that Alt? Yeah, because Shift is the one without the minus sign. So this is Shift, the one with the arrow. So this is Shift, this is Alt or Option if you're on a Mac, and this is Command or Control. Okay, so my guides are locked. If I want to put my name in here, not Palladio's name. So I'm going to click in here with my text tool. And if this is not being annoying. Everything else I can save. I can keep the default. I'm going to go in and just delete all of these guys out because I know what needs to go in here. And I've set up my guide so that I have the location where they need to go.
So he's got a PDF that we uploaded in Illustrator. It's going to be like that, and it's not going to have the guidelines.
I put a template in here that is an Illustrator file.
Ah, okay, and that's
In Canvas, under Tutorials, Interlocking Volumes.
okay.
Ugh. I don't know why I can't grab this and move it over. Right, Interlocking Volumes, boards. So these are all sample files, and the layout is in there.
Okay.
So it'll have all of that vector information in it. And then basically all I need to do is place my plans and my axons that I have made from Rhino last time and from Illustrator last time, and my newly scanned drawings and my newly touched up photographs. So file and place is the way that you bring something in. So I'm going to bring in my images first. So my scanned drawing, I'm going to click on that and hit place. And it's going to pop in here. So that goes in this quadrant. So sketches. And I'm going to zoom in to the point where I can see the bottom corner. And I'm going to line that up with this guide. Your display resolution, or no, I'm thinking of InDesign. Okay, so you should have those all the same size from the way that you've been manipulating them in Photoshop. You can scale them up if you need to. So you might want to have a reference line in there so that you're scaling it to align with the left side and then touch the center point. Or you can scale them up in Photoshop so that you know exactly how big something is. Or you can scale them up using the transform dialog box, if you remember that from the other day. So you can tell it how big you want it to be, or what percentage you want to scale it up or down. You want to make sure that you're scaling them all consistently so that you don't have one that's slightly bigger or smaller than the others. Everybody understand? Okay. And so I've got 6 of those. So you're going to have all of those guys placed in here. If you get to the point where you have something like this happening, right, if your background is bigger and it's overlapping your drawing underneath, that might be a reason to keep the transparent background from Photoshop. Because if not, Illustrator doesn't have any way to crop anything other than by making a mask. So if you have something overlapping something else and there's not any way of changing the stack order, so under Object and Arrange, if I bring this one to the front, now I'm cutting off part of the one in the back, I'm going to have to use a mask. So let's quickly go into how to do that. So a mask, as we remember from Photoshop, is something that allows something to be seen through and something else to be taken away. So if I want to make a mask over this part of the drawing so that everything else becomes transparent, I'm going to use my pen tool to draw an outline around what I want to mask. Right, so this is the part of my sketch that I want to keep. Oops. I'm going to make that black. So now I have basically a black volume on top of my photograph, or my scanned drawing, sorry. I'm going to select both of those, and under Object, Clipping Mask, Make, it's going to now be just, let me draw a box behind it so you can see. If I put just a colored box behind it so that you can see, it's now just showing me the outline of that image and everything else is transparent, right? So if I change the color of this to red, you can see red behind it. So now if I have this drawing that used to overlap, if I put it back in place, I can send it to the background, Object, Arrange, Send to Back, or Shift, Command, Control, bracket. And you can see now that you have these two so that they're not overlapping each other anymore. The whites aren't overlapping. I can see.
Would you only do that on the one that, like since you have 6 of them stacked, would you just make masks for the 2 center ones, or would you make a mask for each?
Yeah, no, it's just whatever you need to have it be masked for. So if you don't need to have them all as masks, then there's not any reason to spend the time doing it. So having just the center ones be masked is a smart idea. Does everybody understand that? Do you understand why we did that? Yes, no, maybe so, yes, okay.
I understand why you did it, but I couldn't do it myself.
Why couldn't you do it yourself? So I've got my photograph here. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it a little bit more clearly. I want to draw a shape over top of this image and cut the image to be that shape, right? With the pen tool, right? So pen, and it's just a series of clicking points to make the outline. So I'm clicking at all of the corner points, and then I don't have any fill or stroke on it yet, so that's why it doesn't look like anything. If I give it a fill, now I can see this is the shape.
Okay.
So I'm going to select that shape and the image behind it. So I'm just holding down Shift to select both of them, or I can click on both of them and it'll select both. Object, Clipping Mask, Make. That's all there is to it. Okay? And you can go in and edit those things, right? So if I want to, I can double click on this and I can go into the mask and edit it, but you don't need to worry about that now. I'm going to also import, or I'm going to place my my photograph. Where did I put that? It's here, tutorials, class tutorials, this one. Alright, so I've got my, let's see. What did I save those as? In here, model photo 1. I'm going to place it. So this is an example of an image that I didn't scale down in Photoshop. So that's again something that you can do in the action. You can scale it down. So I'm going to do it the wrong way and just scale it in Illustrator down to the size that I want it. But remember that that's making my Illustrator file a lot bigger than it needs to be, which is going to make it take more time to print. It's going to take more time to open. It's going to take more time to edit. So it's just going to take more time to do everything. You can see here that we didn't quite get an axonometric view. I wouldn't really recommend stretching these things ever. Don't do that. It's kind of like scaling fonts wider than they should be. Don't ever do that. Or shrinking them down narrower than they should be. Don't ever do that. So it'll just clearly be a slightly different perspective, but your photographs should all be the same perspective as each other. I'm going to also open up my plans and my axonometrics from the other day. And I can bring in all of these drawings. Since they're already Illustrator files, I'm going to just open them and copy and place them in. So Control C, go into my template, come up here, Control V, and I can take one of them and scale it down to the right size. Or I can take them all and scale them down to the right size, sorry. Whatever that size might be. Close enough. Then I can put them where I need to go. Object, compound path, or ungroup. They must be grouped. Why didn't this bring these in? Why did this bring this in as an image? Oh, here we go. We're in some sort of group. Oh, they're grouped because they're a live trace or live paint. That's annoying. So I'm going to try placing them instead. So in my template file, place. I can place an Illustrator file in another Illustrator file. So I'm going to open up my plans, hit place, and I can place them one at a time. So I'm going to place the first one, and then I'm going to place the second one. And just click over the next page.
He wants the geometrically accurate axonometric images on the board, right? Not the original ones you did.
What do you mean?
We went through another process of creating an axonometric drawing, the wireframe.
In my class or in the studio or?
Studio.
Oh, so I don't know what you did in studio, sorry.
I'm just wondering what's supposed to be on that board.
I do not know the answer to that. You can email Dan and find out.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
So anyway, once you bring all of these guys in, you can scale them all down together and then move them into their location where they need to go. And obviously I'll have 6 of these and I'll line them up.
By placing them all just on top of each other, you scale them all at the same time. Is that what you just did?
I placed them all on top of each other and then I selected them all at once. right? So there's, if I were to move them away from each other, they're just on top of each other. So I can select everything all at once. So I've got 4 drawings selected, and I can just scale them all at the same time. I have a feeling there's a better way to do that, but if somebody thinks of it, please feel free to let everybody know. So these guys need to all be, I didn't scale them down enough. I have to remember which lines are which. And you'll be doing this very carefully and thoughtfully so that everything lines up. If you do get things that are not quite aligned, have you looked at the Align palette down here? If it's not open, it's under Window and Align. And you can tell it you want to align things along their top edge, or since these guys are radically not aligned with each other, if I want to align them along their left edge, it'll do that for me.
You select them first and box out.
Select the things you want to align, and then either align them or distribute them. And that'll just make sure everything is exactly lined up with each other.
Will it go to the outside edge or the one with the colors?
Well, it will go to whichever edge is in the diagram down here that you select. So if I want them to, if for some reason, if I want all of these 4 things to be aligned along their top edge, I select them all, and it will align them to the furthest top edge, right? Yeah, if that's what you meant. So it'll align it to the furthest top edge. And then lastly, I'm going to place my axonometric drawings, which are these guys, right? Placing these as PDFs. We'll take a break and I'll figure out why this is not working. You might have to copy and paste them individually. I guess that's going to be the better way to do it. What's that?
Are they still live paint?
They are, yeah. The ones that were here, yeah. That's why they're coming in as a group, but if I try to release the compound path, then it releases all the live paint. So these guys, it's probably best not to place them, but to copy and paste them in from the drawings, which should be the way that you do the others as well, but I've got to figure out what setting is not right in the way I'm showing you how to do it. So copy, paste, move them around. And align them with where they're supposed to go. You might want to do some refinements to your line weights, right? So these are still vector files, so you can adjust your stroke. You might want it to be 1 point instead of 2, or you might want it to be, 10 points instead of 1, whatever makes sense in terms of the balance of the page.
Placing versus copying stuff into the Illustrator file,
Mm-hmm.
will it keep layer information?
If you place it in, it's bringing Illustrator information in as a PDF, so it won't be, it's not really what you want it to be. Sorry, let me just grab this out of the way. Anyway, so sorry, what was your question? If you bring it in, as if you're placing it,
Would it be a better way to bring it in so that you can bring it?
if you bring it in, copy and paste it in from another Illustrator file is better. Yeah. If you place it, it's going to convert it into a graphic. Not doing this very well. So we'll just pretend that we brought these in together. So do you feel like you have the general principles down? I know there's been a couple of hiccups here. Do you feel like you know how to clean up your images and your scans and bring stuff into Illustrator? I'll figure out the plan thing really quickly and then we'll come back here. You know how to scan a drawing, you have your photographs of everything, you have your Rhino files. Anything else?
Where are you gonna be tomorrow?
What's that?
Where are you gonna be tomorrow?
I'm gonna be buying a house tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks. So,
I heard a rumor that was by Alchemy.
it is by Alchemy, yes. It's basically right across the street and a block down. And you can spread the word. The problem that was happening with the plans, why you couldn't copy and paste them over, is because we live painted them as a group. So we have to make them not a group anymore, basically, before we can bring them over individually. So if you select part of that, it should select all of your plans together. Go under Object, Live, Paint, and Expand. And that will release the kind of connection that those things have to each other. They're still grouped together, though, so you also have to ungroup them. So Object, Ungroup. Now you should be able to select them. You might have to ungroup them twice. 3 times. If you ungroup it 3 times, apparently, then you can copy and paste it over. So Control C, Control V, and now you have a vector file that you can work with and scale down to match the to the guides that you set up.